Germany has more than 3,200 different breads today. That didn't happen because people love baking. 11,000 years ago, bread was a hard slab baked on stone. By the 1800s, people were rioting over it in German cities. Today, it's mass-produced by the millions, yet still deeply traditional. This is the full story of how bread evolved from the first farmers to the modern factory. Around 11,000 years ago, long before Germany existed, the first farmers living in Central Europe were facing a simple problem: how to make grain last. They grew ancient cereals like einkorn and emmer, grinding them on stone slabs into a coarse flour. Most of their food was a thick porridge that spoiled quickly. But one accidental discovery would change everything. According to archaeological evidence, early farmers sometimes left this porridge near the fire. When they returned, the mush had dried into a hard, flat cake. It wasn't soft and it wasn't tasty, but it didn't rot. It could be carried for days, survived cold winters, and became the first reliable field ration these early communities ever had. It wasn't bread as we know it today, but it was the first step, and it solved a problem that shaped life in the region for centuries. Bread took a major leap forward far away from Europe, in ancient Egypt. These early bakers figured out something no one else had. If dough is left to rest, wild yeast makes it rise. Around 3000 BC, they created the first sourdough, turning dense grain paste into lighter, fermenting bread. They built conical clay ovens, ran busy bakeries along the Nile, and produced more than 30 types of bread for daily life and religious rituals. To them, bread wasn't just food. It was a gift from the gods. But the breakthrough didn't stay in Egypt. The techniques moved through the Greeks to the Romans, who pushed bread-making further than anyone before them. They improved milling with water-powered mills, refined flour textures, and introduced new grains. Most importantly, they were the first to cultivate rye in Europe, a hardy cereal that would later become essential in northern regions. Across the Roman Empire, bread became a daily staple. Whole grain breads were eaten mostly by the poor because they were filling and kept people full for longer. The upper classes preferred white bread, made from refined flour, and considered it more valuable, cleaner, and more prestigious. The bread you ate didn't just feed you, it revealed your place in society. By the end of antiquity, Roman writers were already describing Germanic and Celtic tribes baking their own breads from barley, oats, and millet. These breads were flat, dense, and closer to hard cakes than to the loaves we know today. By the time Rome faded, the knowledge of bread making had fully reached the lands that would one day become Germany. The foundation was set, and the next era would turn bread into a craft. When the Middle Ages began, bread was no longer just food, it was a profession. As towns grew across German lands, baking turned into a regulated craft. Bakers organized into guilds, and entry wasn't easy. You trained for years under a master, followed strict rules, and were monitored closely. In many cities, bread prices and loaf sizes were set by law to prevent fraud. And if a baker tried to cheat customers, the punishment could be harsh. Some towns even practiced the Bäckertaufe, dunking a dishonest baker into water for everyone to see. But baking wasn't only a trade. It was a shared community duty. Many villages had public bakehouses, where families brought their risen dough to use the communal oven. Large farms had their own ovens, while smaller farms relied on the Lord's oven and paid a portion of their loaves as a fee. Monasteries also played a major role. Their bakeries produced huge amounts of bread, feeding monks, travelers, and the poor. Bread sat at the center of everyday life. It shaped household routines, local politics, and social stability. And rulers knew one thing very well: if the bread supply failed, nothing else could hold a city together. Beyond sustenance, bread in Germany became a powerful cultural symbol of life, unity, and sometimes upheaval. German language reflects this deep connection. Bread is synonymous with livelihood. To earn a living is sein Brot verdienen, to earn one's bread. And a job that pays the bills is a Brotberuf, bread job. An employer can be humorously called a Brotchengeber, giver of bread rolls. Such idioms show how fundamentally bread equals life. But the same food that united families could also tear cities apart. Whenever bread grew scarce, fear spread quickly. Hunger and bread riots appear again and again in German history. Rulers feared a starving crowd more than foreign armies, because if bread prices spiked, unrest followed immediately. During the year without a summer in 1816, volcanic winter destroyed harvests. Desperate families baked hungerbrot, loaves stretched with sawdust, bark, or straw just to survive. It was barely edible, but it kept people alive. And scarcity didn't just cause suffering, it triggered violence. In 1847, after a series of bad harvests, Germany saw a wave of bread riots. In Berlin alone, angry crowds plundered about 30 bakeries in what became known as the Kartoffel Revolution. Dozens of towns experienced similar uprisings as people demanded affordable bread. Even in the 20th century, shortages during wartime pushed society to the edge again. Especially 1917, when bread was rationed and often mixed with cheap fillers like potato or turnip flour, also known as the Steckrüben winter. Bread wasn't just a food, it was the country's pressure point. And whenever the bread failed, the nation's stability failed with it. Over many generations, Germany developed the greatest diversity of breads in the world. This wasn't an accident. It was the result of geography and history working together. Nature set the first limits. Germany's varied climates and soils favored different grains. The cooler, sandy soils of the north and east were ideal for rye, while the warmer regions in the south, including areas like Swabia, supported wheat and spelt. As a result, breads began to differ naturally: darker, dense rye loaves in one region, lighter wheat breads in another. Secondly, the long era of political fragmentation in German history, the patchwork of duchies, kingdoms, free cities, etc., especially after the medieval empire's decentralization in the 13th century, allowed each locality to develop its own bread specialities without a uniform national standard. Unlike France or England, there was no single authority and no national standard defining what bread had to be. No royal decree decided which loaf was correct. A bread from Bavaria could look entirely different from one baked in Schleswig, and both were accepted. Over time, this freedom from uniformity created an extraordinary mosaic of bread types across Germany. Today, the result is unmatched. Germany has over 3,200 officially recognized bread varieties, more than any other country in the world. This diversity was so deeply rooted that German bread culture was added to UNESCO's Intangible Cultural Heritage List in 2014. These breads range from the crusty to the succulent, from almost black to snow white. A few examples show just how wide that range is. Across many regions, traditional sourdough breads remained central to everyday life, valued for their flavor and keeping qualities. Over time, bakers began combining different grains and flours, creating mixed loaves whose exact balance varied from place to place. In Westphalia, bakers developed pumpernickel, a rye bread so dense that it is baked for 16 to 24 hours at low temperatures, turning nearly black and lasting for weeks. In Swabia and Bavaria, other techniques appeared. Pretzels and lye rolls were briefly boiled in alkaline solution, giving them their distinctive crust and bite. And then there are Brötchen, small bread rolls that became a national institution, known by dozens of regional names: Schrippe, Semmel, Weck. They were once a luxury, eaten mainly on Sundays because of the extra labor they required. Today, they are a daily ritual. Fresh rolls from the bakery are still part of the German morning in households across the country. This is the heart of German bread culture. Not one loaf, but thousands, shaped by place, habit, and time. The 19th century changed German bread forever. The Industrial Revolution reached the bakery and turned bread from a local, handcrafted product into a mass commodity. As cities grew and industrialization accelerated, the old guild system began to weaken. Long apprenticeships and strict limits on who could bake didn't survive the legal reforms between 1800 and 1860, when freedom of trade slowly replaced guild monopolies. New technologies moved in fast. By the late 1800s, cities like Berlin, Hamburg, and Munich saw the rise of large Brotfabriken. These were not modern automated plants yet, but they were the first true large-scale bakeries. They installed massive ovens heated by coal or steam pipe systems and used mechanical kneading machines to mix dough in bulk. Crucially, these ovens relied on indirect heat, allowing coal to be used without smoke contaminating the bread. Baking could now run day and night, producing far more bread with far less labor. Then biology delivered its own breakthrough. Around 1850 to 1860, bakers gained access to commercial baker's yeast. Before that, dough relied on sourdough starters or brewer's yeast from beer production. Now fermentation could be controlled and accelerated. Dough that once took days could rise in hours. Soft white bread and toast breads spread quickly, even as traditional rye breads remained common. By the early 20th century, many city dwellers no longer baked at home or visited small neighborhood bakeries. They bought factory-made bread, wrapped, sliced, and shipped in bulk. Bread had become an industrial product, capable of feeding a rapidly growing population at low cost. But the progress came with a price. To keep up with demand and maximize profit, industrial bakeries began taking shortcuts. Additives and so-called bread improvers sped up rising times and extended shelf life. Long fermentations disappeared. Flavor became secondary to efficiency. By the 1960s and 70s, much of the bread eaten in Germany came from factories, soft, uniform, and widely available, but stripped of much of its character. The industrial era solved the problem of quantity, but it created a new problem: quality. Today, German bread stands at a crossroads. One path leads forward through efficiency and innovation. The other looks back toward tradition. By the late 20th century, small Handwerksbäckereien were struggling to survive. Industrial baking giants and discount chains dominated the market. Family-run bakeries closed as shoppers grew used to cheap bread and one-stop supermarkets. By the 2000s, the shift was clear. Large chains and factory outlets controlled most bread sales. Prices were low, but quality and variety suffered. Centuries-old regional knowledge began to disappear. Baking was increasingly seen as an outdated profession. Hard work, low status, and little future. Industrial dough was mixed in central facilities and transported across the country to be baked off in supermarket ovens. German bread culture was becoming uniform. Then the trend reversed. In recent years, a back-to-the-roots movement has taken hold. Influenced by the global demand for organic, authentic, and locally made food, many consumers began searching for traditional bread again. New independent bakeries emerged, calling themselves Backmanufakturen and returning to hand craftsmanship. Bakers revived slow methods, long fermenting sourdoughs, regional heritage grains like emmer and einkorn, and recipes without chemical additives. Customers followed even when it cost more. Demand for biobrot and vollkornbrot increased. Whole grain rye and spelt breads, once dismissed as old-fashioned, became popular again, especially in cities. After 2020, interest grew even further. During COVID lockdowns, many people baked sourdough at home, triggering a nationwide brought-back boom. The process itself rebuilt respect for the craft. The impact reached the profession. Artisan baking began to recover. Bakers reported more apprentices. Regional breads thought to be lost returned to bakery shelves. Products like Schwarzbierbrot or Dinkelvollkorn came back into circulation. Even large industrial bakeries reacted, launching heritage product lines and advertising natural sourdough methods, even if not always applied in the traditional way. German bread was returning to its roots, but it remained a modern business. As a traditional saying goes, Brot und Salz, Gott erhalt's. Bread and salt, may God preserve them. And as long as people live on this land, they will break bread together, continuing the true story of how bread built Germany, slice by slice.